You're listening to Big World Network.
Just Kill Me, Season 3, Episode 2, Trevor Gets His. Written by Wendy Herman. Read by Wendy Herman. Trevor hit the floor, already unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. Talia and I just sat there for a minute, stunned. When I could think again, I was flipping between shock and pride as I stared at Freya, who was standing over her husband, breathing as if she'd just run a mile. The last 30 seconds had been a blur. Talia, Freya, and I had been sitting around the breakfast table in the atrium, discussing the fact that Freya's father, with whom she'd had no contact for nearly 25 years, had been involved in the RVW program. Not just involved, but somewhere at the top. And worse yet, he'd recommended Freya for the risky implant, and authorized her activation, whatever that meant, after the experiment had apparently been a success. Talia believed that my being implanted as well may have just been because we were attached at the hip back then. That didn't fuel me with self-confidence, to say the least. She wasn't trying to be mean, just offering her theories, but I gave her a hard look anyway. We were so wrapped up in our conversation, and I know my ears were ringing from all that had transpired in the past few hours, that we hadn't heard the garage door open. Trevor burst through the door, like I imagined he always did, and before he noticed us across the room, he yelled, "Frey, I'm home! Are you still in bed, you lazy—" That's when he saw us, and the emotions that cycled through his face were numerous. Surprise, confusion, anger, realization, shock, back to anger. There could be only one reason the three of us would be huddled together in a seemingly secret meeting, and he clearly had no idea how to respond to it. Then he noticed Freya was still in her pajamas, sexy little PJs to boot, and his expression was unreadable, like his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. He started toward us with a purpose. "Freya, whatever they told you, it's not true. Rip is trying to take you away from me. And this bitch," he had pointed to Talia, who stared back at him like he was an insignificant fly on the wall. And that's when Freya's fist had collided with his face. She had moved so fast, I didn't even realize she was standing until Trevor's eyes were rolling back into his head. Talia had immediately leapt out of her chair and was checking Trevor's pulse when I came around. "Freya, are you okay?" I started toward her. She turned around and I almost didn't recognize her face. She was so angry. I grabbed her shoulders and tried to make her look at me. Her pupils were dilated and her cheeks flushed. "Freya!" I shook her urgently. Her blood was pumping so hard and so fast, I could feel it through her skin. I tried to guide her back toward her chair, but she resisted. "Leave me alone!" she insisted, a little above her normal decibel level, but she seemed to be talking to no one as she tried to push me away. I glanced back at Talia, who nodded and came to Freya's other side. We headed for the living room, each of us with one of Freya's arms in our own. 6 feet from the couch, she suddenly went limp, and I caught her full weight and picked her up, carrying her the rest of the way. I laid her on the couch and sat on the coffee table. Talia stood at the foot of the couch, and we both watched her nervously. Her eyes were closed, but it was as if she was in an intense dream state, and we could see them jerking back and forth erratically under the lids. I didn't know what to do. In the time it took me to exchange apprehensive looks with Talia, Freya was sitting up, holding her head. I tried to make her lie back down, but she grabbed my arm, giving me a determined look. "I'm fine." I believed her. She sat up and we waited patiently for her to regain her bearings. "Did I kill him?" she asked, taking deliberate deep breaths to slow her heart rate. I let out a snort. "I don't think so, but he's going to have a whopper of a headache when he wakes up." "Why?" "That's what I was thinking. That I was going to kill him. I wanted to kill him." She took a deep breath, continuing to handle the crazy day with strength and grace. She looked up at me and smiled sadly. "I wanted to kill the father of my children." I didn't know how to respond, how to make her feel better about that. I cocked my head slightly and compassion flooded from my eyes. She swallowed and then seemed to rally. She smiled again a little brighter and leaned forward to give me a quick but soft kiss. "It's okay, Ty." She patted my knee. "There are some things you can't fix for me." She stood, a little shaky, but stabilized quickly. "Now I need to clean up before my boys get home from school in," she looked at the clock on the wall, 42 minutes. She seemed lost for a second and placed her hand across her forehead as if it would help her think clearly, and sighed slowly. "I have to figure out what I'm going to tell them about their father." I finished the thought for her. "Who we will remove from your kitchen floor. Talia?" She was already heading out to the garage. "I'll get some rope to restrain the bastard." I looked back at Freya, who seemed like she may need to be restrained as well to hold in all the emotions she was feeling. Freya found my eyes and smiled, but it was just short of the euphoria I was feeling. I couldn't even imagine what was going on in that gorgeous head of hers. I gently put my hands on her shoulders. "We made love on my living room floor," she stated. "Yes, we did. I've loved you forever. Not as forever as I've loved you." I had no idea what I was saying, but I meant every word. She giggled at my nonsensical profession of love, but then her forehead started to crinkle with worry, and she frowned. Why can't I remember why I ended up with Trevor? I took her face in my hands and gently lifted it to make her look at me. I searched her eyes, getting lost in them for a second. A loud crash came from the garage, and a muffled, "God damn it, who put that there?" let us know that Talia was having a little trouble finding the rope. Freya was trying to find answers in my eyes, answers that weren't there. I can't remember either, but we'll figure it out together. I leaned down to kiss her, adrenaline making my veins feel 10 times bigger than they really were, and then, click. This just wasn't my day. We turned and saw Trevor, wiping the blood from his nose with one hand and pointing a gun at my head with the other. He looked so different, his hair sticking up in odd places and his eyes wild, like his evil twin might look if he had one. I took a step toward him to shield Freya. "I wouldn't," was all he said, a strange confidence lacing his tone. "Freya, are you all right? He didn't hurt you, did he?" What the hell was he playing at? My heart was trying to pound through my chest as at least a dozen moves to disarm him flashed through my brain. But all of a sudden my mind was clouded. It was as if just being near Trevor disoriented me. All I could think of was to keep Freya safe. I tried to clear my head and focus. I quickly chose one maneuver and mentally ran through it, preparing myself to kick my former best friend's lying ass, when Freya slowly moved around me. I instinctually tried to stop her, but she grabbed my arm and shot me a look that told me she needed to do this. I hated the idea, but I had a feeling she could handle herself, as she'd already proven. She stepped out in front of me. "Trevor, what's going on?" she asked him as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. "Freya, come stand behind me. You'll be safe." She took another step toward him. I reached for her arm, but she avoided it. "Trevor, tell me what the hell is going on." She said it sternly. He tilted his head slightly and smiled at her, but the madman was still there. "Freya, it's all right. I forgive you. Now come here." His tone was very condescending. She hated to be spoken to like that. "You forgive me?" she asked, the rage starting to build in her voice. "Of course I do. You're my wife. I love you. Now come here." This jackass didn't know Freya at all if he thought she was going to obey him like a puppy, gun or no gun. "Exactly what do you forgive me for, Trevor?" She sounded so calm and was careful to stay out of his arm's reach. "I'm not an idiot, Freya. I know what you and Rip did. But it's not your fault. He seduced you with his lies about brain implants and government conspiracies. And I... What are you saying, Trevor? That I don't have a brain implant? That I wasn't an assassin for the FBI? His forced laughter wouldn't have convinced anyone he was telling the truth. Of course not. Listen to yourself, Freya. An assassin? You're a housewife, not a... I'm an FBI agent, Trevor. Just like you. My eyes bugged out of my head as I stared, frozen, at Trevor, waiting for him to hang himself. He laughed for real this time, like she had just told him the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Just like me? You're not a real agent, Freya. You only got through the program because I let you. You're done with that now. She was circling him with her arms crossed, and he actually seemed nervous, and he was the one holding the gun. I'm done with that? He whipped his head around, trying to follow her and keep the gun trained on me. You didn't think you were going to continue pretending to be an agent, did you? You can go back to doing what you did before. You can be my wife and the mother to our children again. Her eyes narrowed at this. So I was just pretending to be an agent. Of course, none of it was real. I couldn't stand it. Freya, don't listen to him. You're a real agent, and you earned every bit of it. I was surprised when it was Freya who stopped me with a hand in the air and a quick glance. I realized she had a plan. And I'm not a real agent, like you are? Of course not. I just let you believe you were. It finally dawned on Trevor that he had just admitted to lying to her all these years. He was speechless for a few seconds while he worked out his next lie. His tone lost its superiority complex and switched to over-the-top pleading. Freya, I couldn't tell you I was an agent. You know the rules. She was coming around from behind him, still circling like a vulture. I know the rules, because I'm an agent too. Yes, you're an agent. I didn't mean... I just said that because... And he had nothing. Unfortunately, his gun was still pointed at my head, although his attentions were elsewhere at the moment. The move I had chosen was still hanging there, in my frontal lobe, waiting to be used, but I didn't want to sabotage what Freya was doing. She was getting him to confess. And because I'm an agent, a real agent, I also know that you don't have a clip in your gun. And that's when Talia charged him from behind, jumping over the threshold into the living room like a cheetah. But somehow he was ready for her. He swung around and slammed the barrel of his gun right into the side of her head. She hit the floor and was motionless. I moved to take him down, but Freya beat me to it. She spun around so quickly she was almost a blur. She clocked Trevor with a strong roundhouse kick to the head, and he went down. The gun flew out of his hand, and I immediately retrieved it. Freya checked Trevor's vitals to make sure she hadn't killed him, since I guess that might have been construed as a bad thing. But when she straightened, she kicked him in the ribs. He'll live, she spat. I was in love with G.I. Jane. Then she stepped over to check on Talia, who was already stirring and trying to sit up, but Freya made her lie back down. She pointed to a throw pillow on the floor, and I picked it up and handed it to her. She gently placed it under Talia's head, but the quirky neighbor, who was really Freya's secret bodyguard, was white as a ghost, and sweat was forming on her forehead. She had a concussion. Suddenly Talia pointed into the kitchen and mumbled one word before she lost consciousness again. Rope. I grabbed the rope from the kitchen counter and tied up Trevor's hands and feet, while Freya called 911 for Talia. He had hit her with such force, we were afraid to move her to transport her to the hospital ourselves. You don't mess around with head injuries. I want him out of here. Freya nodded toward her husband's lifeless body as she walked over to stand next to me. I nodded in agreement. She was shaking, so I tried to embrace her, but she stopped me. Did you cheat on me? Where the hell did that come from? What? Back in college, I asked Trevor if he knew why you and I broke up, and he said you cheated on me. I was just beginning to realize how much Trevor had played us, all of us. I honestly don't remember, but I can't believe that I would have been that stupid. I would never have cheated on Freya. I pulled her to me and kissed her feverishly. When we pulled apart, she smiled. I didn't think so. She suddenly turned toward the clock on the wall. The boys would be home in 15 minutes. Where will you take him? I knew where we had to go. I didn't like it, but it was the quickest way to get answers, although I was risking getting in big trouble myself. FBI headquarters. He's going to tell me and Director Pixley everything. She nodded, allowing herself to breathe deep. What are you going to do? I asked. You mean after I take care of Talia, the boys, and get a shower? I raised my eyebrows and smirked at her. She reached back and pulled the band out of her hair, letting it hang around her shoulders. So sexy. I reached out and moved a thick strand from her face, and she grabbed my hand, holding it to her cheek. Then we heard the ambulance approaching, and the school bus barreling down the street at the same time. I had to get Trevor out of there. Are you okay? I asked. She gave me a sweet smile and a tiny nod. I will be. Can you come back tonight? I actually had butterflies in my stomach. I couldn't remember the last time I had had that sensation. As soon as I can, I responded. Good. I need you to come with me. Where? To see my father. I'll need someone to keep me from killing him.
You're listening to Big World Network.